Hello, Apple just released the impressive M5 powered iPad Pro. My wallet is crying right now, but before we take a look at that, I think Apple may have shot themselves in the foot. And the irony is they've done that by listening to people like me who have been complaining about the iPadOS for many years. Take the M2 and the M4 iPad Pros for example. The ones a lot of us already own, I think still have a lot of life in them. Apple will hate me for saying this, but for the majority of us, the M5 iPad Pro is a waste of money. Because for the first time in many years, software has finally caught up with the hardware in a meaningful way, and as a tech reviewer, that changes my recommendations quite a bit. I've been running iPadOS 26 on my M4 iPad Pro for a while, and now I'm on 26.1 Developer Beta 3, at the time of recording anyway. I'll explain what's actually different, what's better in a second in that version, but the headline is this: the experience on my iPad Pros is way better than it was. This is definitely not just a trivial upgrade. iPadOS 26 revived a lot of my hope in the iPad itself in terms of how much more useful it is now. And that's the irony for me, right? The software is making the new M5 iPad Pro a much tougher sell for some of us. And let's start there with iPadOS 26 itself. Apple pitched this as the biggest iPadOS release ever, and for once, that doesn't feel like marketing BS. The OS adds a new, truly desktop-like windowing system, a refreshed design language, as you know, they're calling it Liquid Glass, and a load of quality of life upgrades that kind of ripple through your daily use. Now, I'll be honest, on the iPhone, I'm still on the fence about Liquid Glass. You know, that look is, I don't know, the jury is out for me on that one. It can feel a bit performative, you know, it's like way too much going on. Everything looks a bit messy for me and things over the top of each other. But on the iPad, you know, with its bigger screen, it actually works. With more real estate, those layered panes, the depth, you know, the blur, the motion, everything makes a lot more sense in this bigger screen. The Liquid Glass animations feel like they belong on a tablet. I'm not sure how many of you hate it on the iPhone as well, but for me, here on the iPad, Liquid Glass is lovely. And the funny thing is, what I just realized, which is the whole reason why it made me do this video, is that I've been banging this drum for years. The hardware has been miles ahead and the software was holding the iPad Pro back. I've called the iPad Pro a Ferrari stuck in a school zone more than once. Today, for the first time, I can say that Apple has finally moved the speed limit sign. Wait, probably not the best metaphor to use in a tech review. But here's what I mean in practice. With this windowing and new Stage Manager, you're no longer boxed into this rigid few, very limiting windows. Stage Manager now lets you push beyond 4 or 5 windows, freely arrange them, and it actually remembers the setups that you care about. People are reporting 7 pages of docs open on one screen, but in practice, if I'm really honest, I've had more than 4 windows comfortably without the UI collapsing and actually being able to work on those windows. And that's a real shift from where we were before. There are days when I'd rather take the iPad on a train than my laptop, purely because of that multitasking. Now, of course, it depends what I'm doing on that day. If I'm doing any video editing, then I'd rather take my laptop. But there are days where, if I'm just doing productivity stuff, writing, light photo editing, and admin tasks, the iPad is it. That's a perfect workflow for the iPad. And then there's the design consistency, the frosted glass, the layered menus, this very subtle depth, this blurred effect. Everything comes across as a single nice visual, which does a lot to the experience of using an iPad. It's really hard to explain, but I don't know, I felt this way with the Magic Keyboard, almost the same way, like writing on the Magic Keyboard, I can't really describe it, but it makes you enjoy writing. At least it does for me, way more than any other tablets out there. And I used a few, right? And this new UI is doing the same. It's not necessarily making me more productive, but it's making me enjoy using the iPad. Apple Pencil Pro, well, the squeeze and barrel roll gestures aren't new, and I still maintain that, it's a very cheeky thing for Apple to do, to charge more for a whole new pencil just for that extra couple of features. But it's one of those things that I don't mind too much because I know a lot of you are actual artists or graphic designers that really use these features. And here's something we don't see in the Android world. I use a lot of other tablets as well, and it really annoys me when I see an app working better on the iPad and in the same app, being a little bit kind of behind in Android. App developers embrace iPadOS first. So when it comes to taking advantage of these Apple Pencil features, yes, you're gonna see those features being exclusive to the iPad, and first and third-party apps are now tapping into them properly, making the Pencil feel less like a fancy stylus and more like a tool with nice context, depending on the app you're using, of course. A lot of those squeeze and haptics felt like gimmicks when they first came out because not many apps were using it. Even Procreate, which is like a classic app to test these things, wasn't really embracing those features like from day one. But that's the sort of thing that makes the iPad feel more pro rather than just, oh, that's neat. And since we're talking about pencil, sketching, creative workflows, a quick word from our sponsors Paperlike today. To anyone, whether you are upgrading to the M5 iPad Pro or keeping your current one in good condition. If you use your iPad for notes, sketches, freeform diagrams, Procreate, or just as a content consumption device, Paperlike has always been awesome. And for 2025, they just made it better. This is Paperlike V3, which is perfect if you take notes, if you're an artist, or simply enjoy that feel of paper. For me, I also like it for two extra reasons. One is how it removes glare from the screen without having to spend hundreds extra in the nano texture display from Apple. And two is how it rejects the smudges and fingerprints on the display and makes it much easier to clean as well. Not to mention the protection aspect and how you can later sell your iPad without any display scratches. Now, like iPad 26, Paperlike has changed a lot with V3, starting with the new application system, which is called Butterfly Application System. This is brilliant. Honestly, basically it prevents dust and air bubbles from getting there during the installation, and let me tell you, that is a huge improvement. Paperlike spent a lot of time trying to improve this process, and wow, they really delivered. Using the iPad with Paperlike adds just the right bit of texture so your Apple Pencil stops kind of skating on glass. That natural paper feel, which was already great with their own technology called nano dots, is even more refined now. The result is a much cleaner handwriting, more controlled lines if you're drawing, and far fewer of those "I nudged it again" moments. And the kicker is, it comes with 2 Paperlikes in here, and you still get a satisfaction guarantee. And something I just realized as well, if you're on the fence about upgrading your iPad hardware, this is a smart way to make the iPad you already own feel new again. I left a link in the description for you in the pinned comment as well. Or if you're watching this from a TV, just scan the QR code here. And thanks so much Paperlike for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. If you missed what I said at the intro about running the beta version, and because a lot of you are eagle-eyed, yes, I'm running the 26.1 version, which is a developer beta, currently beta 3, and I'm running that version because I want to make sure I'm aware of what's coming in terms of features, but also how, if at all, the M5 chip will make a big difference here. So what's genuinely different from 26.0, which is the current public release? To be perfectly honest, not much, but significant if you do a lot of recording on the iPad, like podcasting and things like that. In this version, they've added a dedicated local capture panel where you can toggle audio only and choose whether files are saved in files. That's a great productivity upgrade if you are doing a lot of recordings. That setting wasn't exposed like this on 26.0. It's a small change, but brilliant for podcasters and anyone recording calls in general. There's also been a few cosmetic tweaks like the updated TV icon. Nothing crazy really. And when it comes to file management, it's not Finder, but it finally feels like it belongs on a Pro tablet, and that's been the case since iPadOS 26 in general. Which brings me to the thing that really changed my tune, the most. I was probably one of the very few people who were very vocal about how bad it was. I remember being told off as well by some of the comments saying, hey, give it time, or you're too impatient, or this is just a beta version. I wasn't wrong. It took years for us to get to today. So I'm glad someone at Apple finally thought the same. Or maybe they're just scared of losing market share to Android tablets. Different conversation. But it's genuinely flexible now. Resizable windows, persistent workspaces, better external display behavior. It works well with pretty much anything now. And it hurts me to say this because I'm a big fan of Samsung DeX, for example. I have a very particular use case for DeX, but I know I'm not alone. A lot of people love DeX, and in a way, I don't know, I'm glad that Apple did this because hopefully you send a message to Samsung saying, hey, you guys, you got work to do now. Here's a spicy thing that I never thought I'd say out loud. For pure window management, iPadOS 26 Stage Manager finally feels nicer than DeX. Yep, I said it. It looks modern, it's consistent, and it gives you a lot more freedom. And even the animations now are really pleasing too. Despite that, I still maintain that DeX is workable and I still love it. It has more breadth because it works on so many devices, but it's now just dated visually. And here's a scary thought for Samsung, right? Imagine if Apple decides to bring this windowing approach to the iPhone one day. Yeah, that would be interesting. But for now, at least the iPad finally feels more mature, more grown up and more useful. And I certainly appreciate that. Let's talk performance and that questionable, not to say scammy, I don't want to sound unprofessional here, but questionable 16 gig RAM tier. And the reason I say it's questionable is because, I don't know, this is purely based on my previous experience. And actually, I haven't really come across many examples where people are experiencing a bottleneck on RAM on the iPad. I've seen lots of different problems, but RAM, I don't remember seeing like not a single RAM related issue. Up until recently, one, we couldn't run several apps at the same time, right? And two, for the apps that you were able to run simultaneously, each of those apps couldn't use more than, I don't know, a few hundred megabytes anyway. I tested this with 3D modeling and drawing apps, and I think recently, maybe iPadOS 15, 16, don't quote me on this, but they've changed, right? And as far as I can tell, Apple don't have a public limit on the memory that each app can use, but some apps have caps now of 5 or 6 gig on an 8 gig iPad and a cap to 12 gig on a 16 gig iPad. I don't know how many apps use them, like gigs of memory, but technically they are now able to do it. So buying an iPad with more memory today may make sense if the apps that you use are designed to take advantage of that extra memory. But to me, that's a big if. Allow me to be my usual cynical self here, but Apple's been nudging people towards the 1 terabyte and 16 gig models for years, since 2020. And I still think it's overkill for how most of us anyway use an iPad. And the likelihood of you using multiple Pro apps that take that much memory on the iPad is very low. Let's be real, you'd be using a Mac at that point. I don't want to be rude about it or kind of hysterical, but if your workflow genuinely needs more memory, fair play. But my M4 iPad Pro with 8 gig of RAM and 256 gig of storage has been more than enough for script writing, research, pencil work, Lightroom edit, and the usual creator admin. It still feels like a beast, so fast, very happy with it. So on balance, for most people, the extra RAM is a classic Apple tax, in my opinion, and it feels like a margin booster for Apple more than a life changer for you. You won't hear many people say that here on YouTube, and yes, I'm 100% not getting an invite to Cupertino for saying this, but I'd much rather be frank with you, and I'm happier knowing that I can freely recommend something to you that will save you cash. And frankly, you can spend that money on a nice weekend or a fancy dinner with your family. I'm sure that would be a much better way to spend your money. Having said that, should you upgrade to the M5 iPad Pro? Here's the crazy thing, right? Apple, accidentally or not, may have just made the older iPad Pros a lot better with software, to the point where upgrading just for a chip bump makes less sense now than it did in previous years. The last two iPad Pros, the M2 and the M4 iPad Pros, with the software update, I think will do more for you than the new silicon right now. That's not me being contrarian. That's me looking into two older iPads here that certainly both feel more useful because Stage Manager actually works. Here's two questions that I want to leave with you to wrestle here with me in the comments. First question is, if the software had been like this, say 2 years ago, specifically talking about that multitasking feature, would you have stopped looking at, say, the MacBook Air or other laptops for certain tasks? And the other question I have is, what's still missing for you? Or if you're not convinced by the iPad Pro, for me, it's two things that can be grouped into, I don't know, let's call it the better Pro app experience. What I mean by that, and I've been banging this drum for many years as well, is that I want to have a richer Pro app parity with the Mac, right? Most people who are using an iPad Pro have a Mac, let's be honest, right? But I want to use the same plugins that I have. I want to be able to share the project between the two. And dare I dream, this continuity project aspect, where I can, for example, do all of my work during the day on a MacBook Pro or a Mac Studio, and then in the evening after dinner or whatever, I can relax on the sofa and do some light editing or some light retouches on the iPad using the pencil on the same project without having to carry all those files. That would be amazing. Or if you're a music producer doing the same in Logic, sharing those things without doing any storage gymnastics, that I think would be amazing. Apple, if you're listening, take this and consider it, because I think a lot of people appreciate it. Clearly, Apple has the resources and the skills and the know-how to deliver stuff that is of high quality, like they've just done with the multitasking. Now it needs to go the extra mile for me. Next, I'm comparing the M5 iPad Pro directly against the Galaxy Tab S11 Ultra, so we can see who's actually pushing tablets forward this year, and I'd love to see you here for that. Cheers. Thank you.